Through this series of Sangha Night Talks, the series has been called Bringing It All Back Home. And we've been looking at a selection of Buddhist teachings and exploring their relevance to us here and now in the 21st century Sheffield. So we've been discussing what translation or re-emphasis is needed and how these teachings can influence our lives and our practice. So we have been mentioning Sangharakshita, the founder of this movement, quite frequently over the last few months. And now the theme feels particularly significant. So as you know, Sangharakshita died a week today on the 30th of October. And it's due to him and his presentation of Buddhism, with its particular emphasis that the true Ratna Buddhist community exists, and exists in the way that it does. And it's almost too much of a cliche to say that we all wouldn't be sitting here without him, but we really wouldn't all be sitting here without him. There'd be no Sheffield Buddhist Centre, no retreat centres, no movement. As I was just checking in with the Sangha Night team today, and I said that I've been reflecting, without Sangharakshita, I think I would have just sleepwalked through my whole life. I sort of, it would have come and gone in an instant. I never sort of would have realised I was alive at all. So a huge amount of gratitude for Sangharakshita. So there'll be other occasions, there are going to be other occasions to mark more fully and completely his incredible life and contribution. However, the theme of this talk is the Sangha, the meaning of spiritual community. And the spirit of and how the spirit of the spiritual community has been brought back home. And the Sangha is perhaps one of the most unique, apparent and inspiring examples of how Sangharakshita's presentation of Buddhism has answered the call of the modern world. So a talk on the Sangha does seem appropriate. So after his enlightenment, the Buddha spent about 40 years of his life, right up until his parinirvana, teaching, communicating. And statues and images of the Buddha, such as this one, often he's shown alone, in meditation posture. And although this is inspiring and deeply significant, if taken out of its context, it could actually result in a misrepresentation of the Buddha's life. So you could get the impression from statues of the Buddha that he lived a life of seclusion and estrangement from human beings. And of course we know this isn't the case. He was incredibly engaged in communicating with people and creating a Sangha, a spiritual community of practitioners around him. So he talked to people, he talked to actual people, not in the abstract, but actual people. He used and encouraged his disciples to speak in the local dialect when they talked, so that they could be understood more clearly. He used metaphors, similes, images that people would be familiar with, so like agricultural metaphors and even metaphors and similes of warfare for training the mind, domestic similes, because he wanted people to understand the spirit of his teachings as clearly as possible, so that they too may practice what he'd practiced, trained as he'd trained, and attained what he'd attained, so to become enlightened, to awaken. So the Buddha wanted to communicate as effectively as possible with the people who were in front of him. This experience of enlightenment, which is ultimately outside of time and space. But we aren't. We're heavily influenced by the conditioning factors around us, and it's important we realise this, because it affects our worldviews that we have, the unconscious assumptions that we hold, the way that we relate to people in the social framework that we're in, and also the way that we relate to Buddhism, the Dharma. So the whole way that we see the world is dependent on these conditionings, on our personal upbringing, and probably more by our shared culture and our particular place in history. So we'd be completely different people if we sat in this room even 150 years ago, even in the same place, even in Sheffield. We'd be a different audience with different thoughts, looking at the world with different eyes, let alone if we were born in a different country in a completely different age. So it's always tempting to look back in history and see the naivety of it all, the short-sightedness of it all. But it's probably going to happen again. People are probably going to look at us and see our short-sightedness, our naivety. So the best chance for us to catch the unconditioned spirit of the Buddha's teachings is for them to be presented to us in light of this, in light of our particular worldview, our particular place in history. So just as the Buddha presented the Dharma in a way that could be understood, practiced, realized by those he was in contact with, so we need a presentation that we can understand, we can practice, we can realize here and now. And this is what Sangharakshita is given. This is what Sangharakshita is given. And this is what it means to bring Buddhism back home, to have a particular practice, a particular presentation that takes into account our worldview. So Sangharakshita, at least for me, has opened up a window so this bright light of truth can shine down in this place here and now. So that's really by way of introduction, just to bring forth, to highlight just how important it is, just how lucky it is to have a presentation of the Dharma that meets our needs, meets our worldview. So what I want to explore tonight is the Sangha. I want to explore the meaning of the Sangha. So what is the Sangha? This is a title of one of Sangharakshita's books. Big, thick book, so I definitely won't be able to go through all of it. But I'll be using much of his material from the talk here and trying to focus on what's particular about Sangharakshita's vision of the Sangha. So the Sangha is a community of practicing Buddhists, a fellowship of those who follow basically the same path towards the same goal. And right from the beginning, the Buddha regarded the Sangha as extremely important. So together with the Buddha and the Dharma, they make up the Triratna, the three jewels. The Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha embody the highest values of existence for Buddhists. And we go for refuge. So we go for refuge to these three jewels. We go for refuge to the Sangha. So a Buddhist is someone who is committed to these three jewels. In traditional language, one who goes to refuge to them. So I've got a quote from What is the Sangha. It's quite pithy and it does need a bit unpacking, but I find it quite helpful to have this wide overview. Going for refuge to the Buddha means accepting the Buddha and no other as one's ultimate spiritual guide and exemplar. Going for refuge to the Dharma means doing one's utmost to understand, practice, and realize the fundamental import of the Buddha's teachings. And going for refuge to the Sangha means looking for inspiration and guidance to those followers of the Buddha, both past and present, who are spiritually more advanced than oneself. Okay. And in the wider sense, the Sangha is everyone who goes to refuge to those three jewels. And there are traditional levels of the Sangha, so traditional terms that the Sangha can be split up into, traditional categories. And I'm just going to have a look at three of them. The first two are dependent upon lifestyle. Traditionally, we've got the full-timer Sangha, and they're comprised of monks and nuns, and these cut off connection with home, leave family, leave secular employment, and devote oneself exclusively to spiritual practice. And at the time of the Buddha, they left home and they walked around with the Buddha, they followed him, slept outside, slept in different dwellings. And now they're pretty much synonymous with the monastic Sangha. So monks and nuns typically living in monasteries. And they have particular rules that govern their lifestyle, the way they live, the jobs they do, what they wear. So this includes celibacy, wearing robes, shaved heads, etc., etc. And to contrast to this, you've got the part-timers. This is traditional language, or lay Sangha, those that live out in the world, so of secular employment, who have families and other responsibilities. And they came to be seen to support the monastic Sangha, the monks and nuns. So they're two different categories separated on lifestyle. And then I just want to say something, just a nod to another category, the Arya Sangha. So Arya means noble or holy. So the noble or holy Sangha is made up of the people who have had some transcendental experience or insight. So these could either be monastic or lay. So this is characterized not on lifestyle, but on higher levels of consciousness. And technically, this is the Sangha that we take refuge in. And it's here that Sangharakshita's emphasis becomes extremely important, because he founded an order in which those ordained within it, those who practice within it, are neither monastic or lay. Okay, so a huge moment in the Buddhist history. The important thing is the commitment to the three jewels, so commitment to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So one of Sangharakshita's aphorisms is commitment is primary, lifestyle secondary, brackets, although not unimportant. But commitment primary, lifestyle secondary. So the Triratna community isn't separated out in a hierarchy that is dependent upon lifestyle or on gender, but has an equal ordination that marks the witnessing of an effective commitment to the three jewels at a particular point in a person's life. So we have an order and a movement that is neither monastic nor lay, and a naturally arising spiritual hierarchy out of that that's very, very fluid and not dependent on external factors or kind of how many badges that you have on your case or any certificates that you've got. So it's naturally arising. Okay, so that's a little bit of an overview of the Sangha. So one of the problems with this wide overview, although sometimes helpful, is that it can feel very abstract, divorced from reality, divorced from actual people. And to be able to commit ourselves effectively to each one of the three jewels, we need a concrete expression of them in our lives. They need to have an actual reality for us here and now. So it's important that the Sangha isn't just an idea for us. So the Sangha is made up of people, and not just people, us. So look left and right, this is it, this is the Sangha. You're in a room of people, and we constitute the Sangha, a community of practitioners. So that in itself is quite amazing that we exist. So we exist as a community of practitioners, bound together by this commitment to the three jewels in whatever stage that we are. And the lifeblood of this Sangha, the lifeblood of this collection, us, is something called Kalyana Mitrata. So Kalyana literally means beautiful, charming, auspicious, helpful, morally good. And Mitrata literally means friendship or companionship. So you could call Kalyana Mitrata beautiful friendship. So the reason the Sangha exists is beautiful friendship. Or as Sangharakshita translates it, spiritual friendship. So the Sangha, us, we collectively make up between our friendships, between our spiritual friendships, a Sangha. So we make up a Sangha between us. And the importance of spiritual friendship has been particularly drawn out by Sangharakshita. Although it was there in the beginning, it was there in the life of the Buddha. So in an exchange between Buddha and one of his disciples called Aryadasa. Okay, so Aryadasa was the Buddha's cousin and attendant for the last 20 years of his life. And he accompanied the Buddha wherever he went. And he was known for his incredible memory. So Aryadasa made a point of listening to everything and remembering that the Buddha had said, so he could pass it on to others. And even if he wasn't there and the Buddha said something, he'd get someone or the Buddha to repeat it to him. So he was well clued up on the teachings. So one day Aryadasa and the Buddha were sitting quietly together, and Aryadasa came out with this. I think you know where I'm going. What did Aryadasa come out with? We're well trained. What did he come out with? Yes, so Lord, he said, I think Kalyana Mitrata, spiritual friendship, is half the spiritual life. And then what did the Buddha say in reply? Say not so, Hollander. Say not so, you're wrong. So Kalyana Mitrata is not half of the spiritual life, it's the whole of the spiritual life. Okay, so presumably no one's hearing that for the first time, so we're well drilled in the emphasis of Triratna, which is a good sign. So spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. Kalyana Mitrata, spiritual friendship, the whole of the spiritual life. So what is Kalyana Mitrata and why is it emphasized so much? So I think it's worth taking some time to go into this personally as well as collectively with others. Because often when something is present, alive in the culture, it can just sort of become part of the decor, the walls, and you don't sort of see it. You don't sort of see the importance of for what it is. So it's well worth, I think, thinking about why spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. And what is it? What are the characteristics that make a friendship spiritual, that make our connections between one another spiritual? What do we mean by spiritual? So you could say that it's a friendship between us, between a group of people that's grounded in the Buddha and the Dharma, so has the Buddha and the Dharma at its heart, at its center. So a friendship grounded in the Buddha, a shared goal, a shared transcendental vision, a shared vision of reality, and grounded in the Dharma, a shared path of practice, a shared set of deeply held values, shared ethics. And I quite like poetically, I'm not sure where I heard this, but spiritual friendship being described as standing shoulder to shoulder facing the Buddha. Okay, so usually we might think of friends sitting opposite, but this is turning outwards, so shoulder to shoulder facing the Buddha, together facing the Buddha. And there are different types of spiritual friendship. So Sangharakshita emphasized both the need for what's called horizontal spiritual friendship, which is friendship with those at a similar stage of the path as you, and vertical friendship, which is friendship with those who are further along the path than you. So I'm conscious that this is, again, quite abstract, really, quite poetic, and it doesn't mean that much in the abstract. And it might be a question you want to explore in your smaller groups, actually, after the talk. What are the characteristics? What characteristics do friendships within the Sangha hold at their best? What is our experience of spiritual friendship? So what are my experiences of spiritual friendship? What characteristics do I think that they have? So the first thing I thought was a deep communication, a meaningful communication between people that's on a deeper level. So the ability to share what's most important and valuable to us, of greater meaning. And it's easy to let these opportunities go by. So we come here to the Buddhist Sangha night, to the Buddhist Center Sangha night, and we, there's a lot of time beforehand for socializing, and it's important to catch up and do some sort of small talk. That's important. And it's also important that we use the connection and the time that we've got together to deeply explore our meanings and the value, actually, our value systems. So deep communication, that's what characterizes spiritual friendship for me. The rising standards of my ethical practice. Okay, so having spiritual friends who are basically much more ethical than me, have a natural effect of bringing me up, rising me to that level. And confession has actually played a part in my spiritual friendship, wanting to confess to my spiritual friends, wanting to be heard, to externalize, to acknowledge something that I've done unskillful, and to move from it, to move past it. So a raising standard of ethical practice and confession. I'm coming out with all the religious language tonight, we'll see. Also rejoicing in merits, so rejoicing in the good that we've done, practicing doing that unapologetically, basically, rejoicing in our own merits and rejoicing in the merits of others. I don't spend that much time outside the Sangha anymore, but I've recently started making little inroads out to see my old university friends and play hockey again, and I've sort of I've been reminded, it's such a rare and important thing to rejoice in merits, and it's so seems to rare. Maybe it's just the circles I run in. Seems to rarely, or they just do it without me. Seems to rarely happen. So if it's not always a good time to spend that much time in the Sangha, actually, we need to have something to contrast it to. So rejoicing in merits. That's a characteristic of spiritual friendship. Expressions of gratitude, expressions of reverence. One thing in particular is joy in the success of my spiritual friends. I wasn't going to specifically mention it, but I think I will. So specifically Aryadasa, so one of my my most long-standing spiritual friends. Seeing him up here on stage just communicating the Dharma so eloquently, so beautifully, and knowing the steps he's had to take to do that. In some ways, when I see that, I just think, I don't think I could be happier, actually. I really don't think that I could be happier. So it's sort of a very kind of pure, light joy that really characterizes that spiritual friendship. And not giving up a personal responsibility. So within a friendship, keeping a personal responsibility for our own actions, our own reactions. So spiritual friends can't save you. Yeah, they can't save you. So we've got these teachings of the law of karma, that our personal actions have effects, and in the end we have to act. So you can't be saved. So keeping a level of personal responsibility, and offering support, so help and guidance. So lots and lots of guidance, lots of wise counsel from many, many spiritual friends. And importantly, it's not exclusive. I think this is the last characteristic I want to talk about. It's not exclusive. Spiritual friendship is not about finding a select few and then kind of hunkering down and everyone else can find themselves their own friends. It's not about that. It's not exclusive. It's about reaching outward, reaching towards more people. So not closed, not tribal. It's a bit difficult to describe. I hope I'm sort of like hitting the kind of flavour. So it is a bit of a texture, spiritual friendship, and it takes cultivation, and it's difficult to do, and it takes time, and it can't be rushed, and it sort of needs it needs maintaining, there's no sort of, in my experience anyway, there's no kind of sharp dividing line between friendship and spiritual friendship, and I think that's they sort of blend into one another, and I think it's a good test to always trace spiritual friendship back to just ordinary human kindness. I think if it doesn't lead back to just ordinary human kindness, it might be something else. It might be a near enemy. Don't know what that might be. Spiritual usage. Okay, so what are the benefits of this emphasis on spiritual friendship that Sangharakshita's got? That Sangharakshita's breathed into this movement? That he drew out from the Buddhist teachings, Arlinda and the Buddha saying no. The Buddha saying no, the spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. Well, basically it's an underpinning principle to all the institutions that we have. So the centres, the communities, the right livelihoods, living and working together, all that sort of institutional work, all the sort of buildings, all the levels. It's the underpinning principle. And if it ever stops being the underpinning principle, we need to blow everything up and start again. It really is, it has to serve spiritual friendship. It allows us to engage with our heights and depths, our whole personality engaging with the Dharma. So it allows us to pour our whole lives into it. It's very difficult to know ourselves in isolation from other people. Others can tell us a lot about ourselves. Spiritual friends can tell us a lot about ourselves. And we live in quite a complicated world, and we're very good at understanding ideas, and we've got lots of information available and books at our fingertips. But the danger is, without a strong emphasis of spiritual friendship, it won't actually result in any transformation happening. We'll just sort of know everything superficially, theoretically, and we won't actually transform our behaviour. So we can know all about the philosophy and shunyata and wisdom and compassion, but really without spiritual friendships, it's very, very difficult for that to make a change in our lives. So being in regular contact with friends, spiritual friends, allows ideas to be transformed into attitudes, and it's attitudes that we're interested in, not ideas. Ideas sort of are thrown out in an instant of pressure. Attitudes stick. Attitudes are the ones that stick. So we want attitudes, not ideas. And other people bring things out of us, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. Our own behaviour is reflected back so we can see what needs transforming. Our relationship with other people provides immediate feedback. Okay, so there's nowhere to hide when other people are around. And it's intimately related with our own going for refuge, with our own commitment. So as our commitment to the three jewels deepens, as our commitment to practice deepens, we deepen those friendships, we deepen spiritual friendships. The deeper our commitment to the three jewels goes, the deeper our spiritual friendships go, and the more inspiration and support they can offer us. And the more effective they are actually at drawing people in. And we can create a really strong momentum. So as we practice and take things deeper ourselves, our spiritual friendships get deeper, which in turn provides energy and inspiration for our individual practice. So the two fuel each other, and the whole Sangha we can deepen in that way. Because it's between us that spiritual friendship creates a living Sangha. And I think this is an important turning around. It's turning around thinking about ourselves and our individual practice alone, and more about how we can help collective practice deepen, more about how we can help the Sangha go deeper, what we can do for the Sangha, not what the Sangha can do for you. Might have to cut that bit out. So the Sangha looks outwards by its very nature, so it attracts people towards it. So the Sangha has an influence. It influences people in it and the outside world. And typically this influence, interestingly, is linked to fragrance, to incense. So we've got these lines in the threefold puja. The fragrance of the perfect life, sweeter than incense, spreads in all directions throughout the world. So that's the kind of influence. So definitely noticeable and beautiful, with an aesthetic quality, and all pervading, and yet quite gentle. You know, not sort of going in with a sledgehammer. So I think it's a really good, a very beautiful image for the influence of the Sangha, being like incense spreading in all directions throughout the world. So the Sangha influences in lots of different ways. I just want to talk about two qualities, one worldly and one transcendental, either end of the spectrum, and then maybe together in the groups we can fill out all the middle. So one thing that we do, the Sangha does, is creates a positive environment that people are attracted to. So the Buddhist Centre as providing a happy, healthy human place to be. And initially for people that might not even include anything of a particular transcendental dimension. And I think it's still important that even if that's the case, that the Sangha just provides a positive and friendly atmosphere and creates a space and a place for people to become more fully human. And I'm thinking of some of the things that we do to facilitate that seem trivial, but are definitely not. So eating together, all the endless cups of teas that we drink. It's all about creating that kind of human atmosphere and that sort of normal level of positivity. It's very important to protect this, so not speaking harshly to one another. I think the tea room is the only place that I see where people don't have their phones out on the table. So that's part of our culture because we value awareness. And it's sort of nobody kind of says it, apart from I've just said it, so hopefully I don't break the spell, but nobody sort of says it. It's just embedded within our culture, within our ethos, within creating this normal human environment. Yes, and then of course we've got things like the dana economy, so taking us out of that traditional, the sort of the common transactional relationship, so you give me something, I'll give you something kind of thing. So just creating on a very, very normal human sense, human level, a healthy atmosphere that prepares people to hear the Dharma, prepares the mind for receiving the Dharma, receiving something higher, receiving something beautiful. So if you can remember the wheel of life, there's all these different realms in the wheel of life, and they can represent mental states or different places, different mythologies. So there's lots of different mythology, lots of different interpretation. But in the human realm, the people are most receptive to the Dharma. So it's like we need to create a place where we can be human first, for people to really receive the Dharma, receive Buddhism in the right way. So I think of that as that influence is like the fragrance coming from the incense stick. So that's the fragrance, the beautiful fragrance spreading out into the world. So offering people a human place, which is extremely difficult. And then on the other side, on the other level, the other sense of the spectrum, on the other range, there's creating an atmosphere for something transcendental to arise. So if the Sangha's like an incense stick, what's happening on the very tip, the burning tip? So hopefully we're coming together as much as possible and creating a strong core of dedicated practitioners. Each person going for refuge to the three jewels and deepening spiritual friendships amongst themselves. And through this, allowing something other to arise. So a hot core of practitioners, a core that's on fire with going for refuge with spiritual friendship. I just want to quote something from the Superpersonal Force, which is a paper written by Subhuti and Sangharakshita. So when people come together who deeply share a common vision and purpose, their efforts combine in a momentum that draws them all beyond themselves. This is the Sangha. So their efforts combine in a momentum that draws them all onward beyond themselves. This is the Sangha. If they are able to join in real harmony with openness and mutual trust, then the weakness of each are removed and the strength contributed selflessly to their shared Dharma service. Between them, they set up a powerful current which they are all simultaneously carried along. And for me, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, this style of writing, but for me that's really, really inspiring, and something that I do want to dedicate my life to is joining together with a group of people to allow something else to arise. So he goes on to say that if there's a sufficient intensity there between spiritual friends practicing, then collectively a new level of consciousness can arise between them. Higher levels of awakening that doesn't deny an individual consciousness but of one person, but is much more than each. And this again is one of Sangharakshita's emphasis, And one of his most inspiring teachings, I find, that insight, that new levels of consciousness arise within a Sangha, not individually. They rise within a group of people, within a Sangha. And this addresses really beautifully this age-old problem of the Dharma of practicing by yourself to go beyond yourself, because that's sort of a closed loop, and here we've got a perspective on that. So another way of talking about this is the order, the movement coming together to collectively form a bodhisattva. So collectively form the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara that benefits living beings. So what an incredible thing the Sangha is at its highest level. And there are two great occasions coming up to mark this. So one, Mitra ceremonies next week. So a chance to rejoice in those becoming Mitras and ritually mark that commitment to practice of going for refuge and practice the ethical precepts. And Sangha Day on the 25th of November, where we reaffirm our commitments that we've made as Mitras or order members. And the last thing that I want to say is that the Sangha needs to be something particular. It needs to have a common vision and a common purpose. It can't be something in general. For this movement, the common vision and the common purpose comes from Sangharakshita. So it's an aspiration that I have for myself and for the Sangha and for all my spiritual friends, that we get to know the spirit of his presentation of the Dharma as best we can and become familiar with it. So don't take what you know about Sangharakshita second-hand if possible. If you haven't encountered him yet, dive in, learn about his presentation. And there is a problem here, and that's where to start. So there's so many books, so many lectures recorded online, so many different classical series like the Noble Eightfold Path. But there are some great things in the library, some thinner books with the selections of his writings that can be pointed out. Things for me like Human Enlightenment and The Taste of Freedom, two thin books that really acted as a great appetizer for me. So if you've already started looking into Sangharakshita, keep going. It's worth it. Keep going and share with each other what you found helpful and what any reflections that you've had. Let's share them between us. If you've read everything that he's written, go back and read it again. So listen to him, watch him, think about him, reflect about what he's trying to say. Look into his memoirs. Someone was telling me you can get them on audiobook now. So there's real treasures in there, and it's a concrete expression of what it looks like to go for refuge. And because there's so much to us for us available, there's all this information about different schools of Buddhism, different practices and teachings, and we just can't go into everything deeply. We've only got time and capacity for so much. And for some it is really important to have a look around and try different paths, which is fine. But eventually we do have to choose, because it doesn't all end up in the same place. Some things just lead you in a cul-de-sac, and there's no time for that. There's only time for the best. So become a Sangharakshita expert, as Surita once said to the audience in a talk at Padmaloka. And this is important because he's presented principles and practices of Buddhism in a way that can be lived out. And if we all practice intensely, something altogether out of this world could arise amongst us, within us. And that is actually the real meaning of spiritual community, allowing something totally transcendental to arise through our collective practice.